It then turned into the Microsoft Research Headquarters, which we then have done an adaptive refit for all over the place. But I think for people in the urban space, this room might be interesting because in 2015, the final framing and the negotiations of SDG 11 happened in this room. So whatever, you know. Now, SDG 11, of course, has many complications with it. But, and you know, we have colleagues here from UCLG and other places, but basically the major urban networks kind of met here. So, you know, we have colleagues from WIGO here, from UCLG, from Cities Alliance, etc. There was a very intense session that went over 3 days and I guess almost 2.5 nights to try and frame the compromise which led to SDG 11. As you know, for those of us, there was an intense political battle taking place in the intergovernmental system, whether cities were important or not. And we had to let go of a whole range of things. In fact, many of the things that we've heard about in the morning, the intersection between gender and health and education and even risk, we had to let go of because it was difficult for those constituencies in the global frame to accept that urbanism and people living in cities actually had a contribution to the question. And of course, there was a moment in which you know, there was a very tight binary between rural and urban, and we almost lost that process. So let's say the compromise and all the mess that you see that many of us are trying to deal with in many parts of the world was, in a sense, it was closed here, and of course it went on to other places. So we're really very glad to have you here, and more than that, we work on the intersection on many of these questions. You heard, of course, obviously development and sustainability, but on risk, on climate, and on you know, a whole range of questions to deal with inequality and inclusion, which of course is, I guess, the primary end of our work. So before I hand over to Caren, we have a small exhibition outside which is trying to contextualize in both space and time how this small place, Bangalore, has transformed over the last 200 years or so. And it's interesting because this is a sort of, you know, for many of you coming from across the world, this was actually a very small town. But it actually has been, and you'll see from the first exhibit out there, has been the central, has been a pivot of the battle between a whole range of geopolitical powers. The first thing that you'll see for people from India is the battle plan of 1791, where Cornwallis and Arthur Wellesley, the historians are nodding in the room. Happened somewhere in this place, you'll see it. And in a sense, the interesting thing, of course, is you see the beginnings of surveying, and that's the first ordnance survey that you have of this place. You can literally see where the cannons were fired, because, you know, whole range of changes. And you know, the city actually became a center of science and technology primarily because Japanese bombers could not reach this city. It was too far for them to reach because India was a prime location of contest between the Axis powers and X, Y, and Z. So Mountbatten had his headquarters here. A lot of the strategic sort of technological and aerospace industry built out of here, which is one of the reasons why you see this path dependency of the city. So you see many of those things, but of course, like all cities in many parts of our world, especially mega cities in the global south, there is deep inequality here. Some of you have been shocked over the last few days to see that, but actually Bangalore is a very gentle and very calm city by Indian standards. So if you think this is tough, then you know we can take you to many other places that are much more exciting, much more challenging. A city like Mumbai, where 2/3 of people live in informal settlements. Cities like Delhi, where people, you know, their objective of the week is to run somebody over, etc. So anyway, I would sort of encourage you to go across and join the exhibition. This is a continuation of something that our colleagues started in Havana. They did a wonderful piece of work there, and we were, really sort of educated. Havana is a remarkable city and something that's, I think, a place that many people from other parts of the world should really experience. So we're trying to continue that tradition and bring together stuff on that. So, we can join us, the team that's worked on this, both the historians and the graphics people and the GIS people will be happy to talk to you about what's happening. And we'll continue this conversation in the evening. So over to Caren, and then I'll quickly introduce Janvi Falke, who is a sort of surprise entrant into the conversation.
Well, actually, Aro has said most of what I wanted to say, so I won't say much, other than to say that as part of the No program, we ask our hosts in each of our when we gather annually, as we're doing here, to think about what we call a city exhibition. And as Aro said, last year we were in Havana, and it just so happened that we were there on the 500th anniversary of Havana. So the exhibition took on a particularly amazing kind of reflection of that history. And I learned from our exhibition next door that Bangalore is 450 years old, which I found also very interesting, that kind of, quite close history and yet very different history. And so the title, as you'll see, of the exhibition is Nakshe-Kathe, and which means stories and maps, which exactly is what you'll find next door. So I do hope that you'll wander through there and have a look. And in this instance, we're sharing the support of this exhibition, not just with the No program, but also with the Peak program, which are two big programs that were funded under the GCRF, the Global Challenges Research Fund. So do take the time to have a look. It's really an interesting exhibition. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So before I introduce Janvi, just a little bit of context. We are, as we're building out our campus, some of you will be coming there maybe on Sunday. The center of the campus is centered around 2 or 3 facilities. The most obvious one is a kitchen. Yeah, so food is really important to people here, and we'll be growing our own food. So we have a very large kitchen for 1,000 odd people. But we also have, or we hope to build, the first metropolitan museum in the country. So in some senses, this is the beginning of that journey. But the Metropolitan Museum, like the great museums that we see in some parts of the world, especially in China, the thing that really, really strikes you when you go to a Chinese city is they have this long view of pretty much in the larger cities, is we're going to twin the Metropolitan Museum with an interpretation center, because our campus is hopefully going to be at the heart of India's first long-term urban ecological research site. So we're going to try and see what the interaction between urbanism, the natural and built environment is like, and we're going to be actually tracking and connecting with that. So these 3 buildings need to be curated and worked out. And I thought, just to provoke her, Janvi is a historian. She's also the director of the Science Gallery. So, when a city kind of arrives in the global space, then maybe the Science Gallery also comes behind it. This is one of 6 galleries across the world, which is bringing together work on science in an integrated manner. For many of you from the UK, she was at King's for a long period of time. So there's an interesting story of the struggle to try and create an open public space which brings together all of the major scientific traditions. There's a lot of stuff that, just down the road, we have a couple of Nobel laureates who've done interesting things, which is central to the imagination of this city. And we're hoping that, in time we can try and bring together these public facilities to really enable a dialogue about very difficult things that are happening here. I mean, science is not the only thing that we face. This is a city in which lakes catch fire and lots of other interesting things happen, in which maybe we can bring this thing together. So just quickly, I just thought I'd introduce her, and then maybe we can pick up some conversations with her later. Janvi?
Thank you very much. So not all surprises are good. I hope to be a pleasant one at least. So thank you very much, Aromar, for the opportunity to speak to you all. My first contact with Bangalore, my first proper contact with Bangalore was when I was trying to put together an exhibition on Bangalore as new science city of India for the Science Museum in London. At that point of time, I spent about a year thinking about the city, never wrote it up because the exhibition never took place. But the transitions that, some of the transitions that you'll see in the maps that have been put here are very, very interesting ones. I mean, broadly speaking, Bangalore has gone from being a military city to a garden city, or a garden city to a military city, depending on how, whether you look at the Cantonment as a starting point or the earlier princely state of Mysore as a starting point. But a military city to a garden city to a military city to an industrial city, when after the Second World War, thanks to the Southeast Asia Command of Mountbatten being situated here, as a result of which all warplanes were serviced here and assembled, serviced, used from here. And so it became, so the industrial city, in a sense, grew at the back of the military effort that took place in a very short period, actually, basically about 4 or 5 years during the Second World War. Followed by, followed in a sense on the back of it, or piggybacking on it, came the tech city. And sort of simmering under it all was something that we probably only realize now is the ambition of the city to be a science city. And the effort is bearing fruit, as a result of which, as Aro mentioned, we are a part of a global network of galleries, and the obvious city to bring the science gallery to seemed to be Bangalore. I'm not from Bangalore, so this is not a self-endorsement of any kind. I'm from Bombay, actually. So it breaks my heart that Bombay is not ready for an institution of this kind. It really isn't. And so it is in many ways like at the turn of the 19th to the 20th centuries, Calcutta was India's science city, and we see that today here. That rests on a history of having hosted or having been home to India's very first research institution in science, which is the Indian Institute of Science, not too far from here, and a range of other institutions that then grew around here, but sort of simmered underneath, supporting a range of efforts, including the one for war and for industry and for defense. And that identity is emerging more strongly today as research in biology, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, but also a range of other things. So coming back to the gallery, the institution I'm struggling to establish, and for which I've actually had some incredible support from Aro right at the start. I mean, I came here, as he already has noted, as a historian who was used to teaching and hiding under the bed, with a glass of wine and occasionally writing books, to establishing an institution, that too in India. So I have been a supervisor. I've been supervising construction and audits and things like that over the last 23 months. Next month I lose the right to speak in months. I'll have to start speaking in years. But the goal is, and as Aro very rightly pointed out, one is to strengthen connections between institutions and build an ecosystem of us doing, unusual work in a sense. I mean, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the universities in India have, in a sense, declined pretty rapidly in the last 40, 50 years. And so the kind of research one would see otherwise happening in a university is simply not taking place, and as a result of which other institutions are taking over those responsibilities to conduct what would otherwise be happening in academic institutions. And so one thing is for us to strengthen each other. And the other is, and the statement we sort of, all of us are supposed to have taglines nowadays because that's how things work. But the phrase that captures our effort most is science. So we say that we are all about science, culture, and experiment, but what we want to do is bring science back into culture, because the distance between the two has grown so much in India that in the first instance we no longer have proper universities where the chance for a physicist to meet a cinematographer at lunch at a table is simply not there. I mean, you have institutions of science working separately from institutions of film and institutions for and we know why those institutions have come up, but those opportunities for exchange, the opportunity for conversation is simply not there. And those are the conversations we wish to establish. Those are those conversations I think Aro has already been able to successfully conduct at the IHS, with a focus on the city. And what we are trying to do is bring all of that energy from various places to bear upon science. Our very first exhibition season has just opened about a month ago at the Bangalore International Center, for those of you who live here or those of you who have the time to go there. The exhibition is on water. It's called Submerge. It also features a traveling exhibition from the Smithsonian called H2O Today. But the critical part of it are the experiments that we've assemble to showcase what we mean by bringing science back into culture, and what does it mean to create not a professional but a cultural conversation around science. I think with that I would say thank you very much for your attention and allowing me to stand between yourselves and the food. Thank you.
So over to